So I'm sorry, let me see the title again. Untangling Karma, Intimate Zen Stories on Healing Trauma. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Kyoku Tracy Whalen. I'm a resident staff member at Hokyoji. So I want to set this up because Byakuren's talk will include slides. So just give me a minute to make sure I've got everything right here. So here we go. We're going to pin Byakuren. And we're going to make Byakuren host in just a minute. There you are. Would you unmute? Okay, where are you? Make host. No, wrong person. There you are. Yes. All right. Can everybody see Byakuren, I hope? And I'm going to retire from the main scene here.
Hi, everybody. I look around and see a lot of old friends and new friends. Ooh, wow. Nice to see you. Let's start with an intention. Big intention is for what I say to help clarify practice for people and also to inspire people to practice in a deeply integrated way. And personally, my intention is to trust myself, to what I'm calling stand in love, which means for me that any anger or resentment I have, I try to pivot that into a way that might help, and in this instance, help the development of Buddhism in America in the 21st century. So those are my intentions and our intentions. I have just come out of a darker period in my life. 4.5 years ago, I left Clouds and Water and I left teaching. And there was a kind of a rupture in my personal life that threw me into a period of great doubt. That's what I'm calling it now. At the time, it felt just like suffering upon suffering. But now I realize it was plunging into great doubt. And I don't actually think great doubt is a bad thing. It's where we go when we have to reevaluate or relook at our life. And hopefully looking at it at a deeper level or a more Dharma-centered level, or with more clarity about our ego drives. So I'm now actually starting to come out, and it's been very interesting for me as I come out of this period to see, oh, what am I going to teach if people ask me to teach? And it ended up being Buddha's first teaching, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So I've been teaching what this lecture you're going to see I've been doing for the last year. Maybe this is the 7th time I've done this PowerPoint. And I'm totally into it. So I think it's great. I'm doing it over and over. And some of you have already heard it, I believe. But I find the importance to be worthy of repeat. Let's see, is there any other thing I want to say? No, let's start it up then. I have to figure this out as well. Share my screen. That's the one I want to share. Share. Did it work? Yes. Okay. All right. So what I really want to talk about are the 3 bases and the Eightfold Path, but I feel like I can't just jump in there. So we're going to start with the 4 Noble Truths. And most of these, I think that as I look around, most of you know these quite well and have studied them. What I'm interested in this talk and in my life is not studying them. It's really, really practicing. How do we actually practice with what the first teachings of the Buddha was? So that's the perspective that I'm going to be talking from. And because I think most of you know the 4 Noble Truths, what I'm going to emphasize is the cause and effect, which is the first column here. Because karma has become my understanding of karma has become very important to me. In fact, the book that's coming out in July is really about understanding how conditions produce the present moment and conditions produce our suffering, and that we have choices. Because of cause and effect, we have choices that can produce suffering or non-suffering in our life. So I am going to emphasize that cause and effect. So the first truth, as most of you know, I love what Katagiri Roshi used to call it, which is holy suffering. I have to sit on the front of my chair. In order to give a talk, my spine has to be straight, right? Holy suffering. I like that he used the word holy. So if we live in a body, if we have a mind, which we all have, we are living in this realm of existence that has duality, and the tension between the duality often is difficult. We all know how dissatisfying life can be. Like, I mean, even in the littlest way, I'm always dissatisfied. Like, my tea isn't hot enough. I don't want to be nervous to give a talk. I mean, as I go through the day, all of these dissatisfactions arise. The cause, Buddha said, the cause of our suffering is attachments, desires, and craving, that we attach to what we like and we have aversion towards what we don't like. And this tension between the opposites produces our suffering. And I'm going to talk more about this. The third and fourth. So this is a couplet that attachment, I like the word, clinging attachment produces our suffering. And this is a couplet that if we follow the Eightfold Path, this is our practices, we will be able to alleviate the suffering, not the base suffering, which is part of life, which is old age, illness, and death. That base suffering we all have, but the suffering that's produced by the second truth, by clinging, that can be cessated, that can be stopped through practice. And the practice is the Eightfold Path. And it's very hard for me now to use the word enlightenment, or I don't know, it's just, I feel like that word has been so misunderstood. So it's easier for me to use the word freedom freedom of choice, having choice, and also Thich Nhat Hanh. May he rest in peace. Thank you so much, Thich Nhat Hanh, for your great, great teaching. Thich Nhat Hanh simply called it well-being. How can we live in this life with a contented mind and be able to love and have compassion for the holy suffering of the world? And so that's the end goal, if there's an end goal. But what I find is there isn't an end goal. Practice is really, really about making our choices every day, every hour, every moment, choosing what we think will be a more wholesome choice. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the second noble truth. And many of you have known me for a long time, but I've really worked very much with Lojong and Tonglen, which are Tibetan practices. They're very emotional practices and very practical. The Lojong slogans are about how to practice in daily life for the most part. And so this is my favorite Lojong slogan, and it's very much become my go-to practice for how do I practice in the moment. So the Lojong slogans is 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 seeds of virtue. And the 3 objects are, the feeling in the 5 skandhas: like, dislike, and neutral. So I just like to say, if you're in a human body, if you're on this plane of existence at all, you have these 3 objects that arise. I like this, I don't like that, and or I'm neutral. And I like to say that even a cell or an amoeba, the most smallest beings, microscopic beings, have these 3 objects. A cell says, I need this from the blood, and takes it. That would be injurious to me, so I don't take it. And I don't even notice what I don't need or what would be injurious. It just flows by in the blood. So this is a universal, we cannot stop our objects. The second noble truth, though, says, now we're moving into the poisons. The 3 objects become the 3 poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance, which starts the wheel of samsara, or the wheel of suffering. So when we notice that our like has turned into attachment, our dislike has turned into hatred or aggression, I notice this so much. I'm really kind of an angry person, which I learned from writing this book. But we have all 3 of them all the time. And if neutrality can turn into ignorance. And this one's a little hard. I think ignorance of the truth of the Dharma is one main thing in the third: greed, anger, and ignorance. So if you're living without a sense of the truth, then you're going to create a lot of suffering in your life. I also think in modern psychological terms, you could also call it denial or obfuscation, or just not wanting to deal with it. So the 3 objects turn into the 3 poisons. And at this line, can you see these little arrows? I think you can. At this line, as I'm going through my day, when I notice that has occurred, the practice is to plant seeds of virtue, even one mustard seed size virtuous quality, wholesome quality. And we have a lot of those in the paramitas, in the divine abodes. Anything that I can plant in the present moment. Sometimes I use the same thing, like I work on patience or I work on generosity, or lately I've been working on gentleness. So, and even when I say that, I could gentle up my voice. You know, when I get afraid, I'm not as gentle. So when I give a talk, I'm slightly afraid. So I'm just going to breathe so I can be more gentle about giving this talk. And that is an example of what I'm trying to say. That every moment, if we notice where we're at, we can plant a seed. And that seed is a cause for a future effect. This is also a practice, really important practice for the second noble truth. And I've talked a lot that if you're living in the world, if you're an embodied person, the worldly winds are always around, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, so forth. And I always say at this point, which side do you think that you cling to? Which I think is very funny. It's very obvious that I would rather have pleasure than pain. I would rather have gain than loss, rather have success than failure. So in order to work with this, I mean, equanimity is the principle that I am available to receive whatever the experience of the moment is, whether it's success or whether it's failure. I am willing to receive my human life fully. Katagiri just said in my voice, in my head, wholeheartedly. I'm willing to receive life. And what helps me make these choices about my virtuous seed that I'm planting is at the bottom, to be in alignment with my intentions, my spiritual intentions, to have them front and center so that I have something larger to relate to than just my desire system. I've taught a lot about desire systems as being our ego system of trying to get what we think we need and trying to push away what we think we don't want. But that's not going to work in the way life is set up. I think I'm going to go skip a thing and go right here. So that's now we're moving into the Eightfold Path. And what I like to think about before the Eightfold Path is the three bases. And I believe I learned the three bases from Stephen Batchelor. I'm not quite sure, but when I think back, I think he was the one who introduced me to the three bases and the idea of the three-legged stool. Here to the three-legged stool. And what that means is that our practice is sitting on three pillars or three legs of a stool. And all three legs, this is my most important statement, all three legs have to be equally developed. Or what happens? If one leg is shorter than the other, the stool falls over. And I have watched myself and many other practitioners fall off the stool. And in most cases this is all from my experience, and you can have your own opinion, please do, from your experience. My experience in watching practitioners is in America, anyway, that's my only experience, is America convert Buddhism. In that realm, most of us fall off the stool with ethics, because in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, when the seeds of convert Buddhism were planted, we were not that interested in ethics. We were really interested in samadhi, because a lot of us, I'm of the age, I can say, I started Buddhism in the 60s. We were psychedelic children, and we were interested in mind states and transcendence and getting away from life through drugs and then through meditation practice. So samadhi was completely emphasized, and prajna a little bit, but we almost ignored ethics and behavior in the early years of convert Buddhism. And I feel like that is something that 21st century Buddhism, this is my hope and my prayer, that that'll change, that we'll see that all three are equally important. And if we don't do all three, we have these disturbances in sanghas that we all know of. Two of my sanghas have had disturbances, and many others. And I think it's because we have not been developing our ethical behavior as much as we should. And in my understanding of ethnic Buddhism, coming from Asia, they often start with ethics. They start with generosity, patience, and behavior in the paramitas. And meditation often comes after you've really grounded yourself in wholesome ethical behavior. I could stop there, but I have we're going to keep going. I'll just say this right now, that I'm changing for the Eightfold Path the word right to wise. I got the word wise from the Vipassana community. And Thich Nhat Hanh has called it connected. Isn't that nice? Like connected intention, connected behavior, connected samadhi. So anyway, I just want to say, as we go forward, I am going to try and change my tongue from saying right to saying wise. And I think language is very important, really, because right, whenever I hear right, it sets it up against wrong. And then there's the tension of the duality that causes suffering. So wise means, what does wise mean? Just how am I holding the paradox of living? And what would be the best seed to plant right now, given the conditions that I'm experiencing? That's quite different from right and wrong. Okay, so here's the filled in chart. The other reason I made this chart, I have two reasons I made the chart. One is because I couldn't remember the Eightfold Path. And I was a Zen teacher and I had to write it down, to remember it. And as soon as I got the three bases, that I could remember, prajna, samadhi, and sila, that was easy. And then I realized, and it's very systematic. The wise view and wise intention is under prajna. Certain things are under samadhi, and certain things are under sila. So now I can get it. I'm totally memorized the Eightfold Path through this chart. The other reason this chart is it was created in my prison Sangha. May they be blessed. Since COVID, all the prison Sanghas have been dormant, which is sad. However, when I was teaching at the prison, I always put this up because I could say to the men, oh, this talk we're having today is about wise behavior, or this talk I'm giving today is about mindfulness. And we would place it on the overall map of what is a Buddhist life, which is what I consider this a map. So I want to just start with samadhi, because that's where I started. As I was saying, as a hippie, I just wanted to leave the planet. And I learned how to do that, actually, for better or for worse. So that's the negative. But there's a real positive for unifying the mind, which is there's a type of power or personal responsibility or accountability, or I can do what my intentions are, I can do by the power of having a unified mind, a mind that's able to be placed, a mind that I can say, I am doing the dishes now. Will you please come and do the dishes with me? A mind that can be placed, a mind that can be free, also above, to go into the consciousnesses that are not based on my desire system. Very important. And taking that power to place your mind, you move in, that's what wise concentration. Then in activity, you move into mindfulness. And I want to say one thing here, because I wrote mindfulness or heartfulness. So what I'm interested in as I come out of this period of doubting everything and reevaluation is I would like there to be more heart qualities in Buddhism and particularly in Zen. And Shin, which is mind, heart, but we've always translated it as mind. And I wonder exactly why that is so. But a lot of the translations came from Jesuit men who translated from Chinese or Japanese. They didn't really understand the Dharma, I don't believe. So we get words like only mindfulness, but not heartfulness. We get words like emptiness or voidness, rather than interdependence or unbounded openness. So a lot of the words we've inherited, I feel, do not express the heart qualities as well. And I'm going to take a chance and say the feminine qualities of life have not been honored as much in our tradition as I'm hoping the 21st century is going to do. And I'll just say right now, because I'm talking about kind of about feminism and woman, what I don't want to say woman like a gender. I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about archetypal qualities that we usually associate with feminine, or yin, if you're talking about yin and yang. When I began to teach, I felt an enormous debt to Katagiri Roshi. Enormous, because he gave me my life. He gave me my spiritual life. He taught me how to practice. It was a great debt. And then I became a Zen teacher involved in a Zen center. And I felt like, well, I have to teach my students the way Roshi taught me. Otherwise, this will die. So that's what I did. I wore my robes. I taught how you put in an incense in the incense holder, how you handed it, the Jisha handed it to the teacher. I taught that your fingertips need to be opposite your nose, all those kind of things, because I felt they would die if I, as the transition American, having an Asian teacher, and I'm an American, if I didn't teach that. Now, 50 years later, 30 years later, 20 years later, I would like to be the voice of changing that. Now we know how the Japanese did it, and it doesn't totally apply to American psychology or Americans' needs spiritually. So, I'm partly coming back into a teaching modality, or this book. The book is definitely about how to allow for change, where the heart qualities, where the stories of our life are more important and not dismissed, and how we really understand our behavior in life. So let's go into the middle now. I need to breathe after that. It's kind of scary for me to say that. So it's scary, but it's what my experience is teaching me after 50 years of being in Buddhism and 20 years of teaching. So classically, wise effort would go down here. It's classically under samadhi, but I put it inside the stool. So I'm changing a few little things. And I think it's because wise effort, how we do, what our energy is like, and how we do our spiritual practices, they're in every place. It goes everywhere. It's omniscient. And I'm taking from Pema Chodron, not too tight and not too loose, as a guider for my effort. And here, okay, so I know we're all coming from different places. I'm coming from the place of overachieving, trying too hard, too much effort. And I know some of you are coming from the opposite, of not enough effort, or you feel better lying on the couch, or your family didn't have a lot of ambition, so you don't either. So there's a balancing we have to do, knowing ourselves, knowing what our habituated patterns are, and what gets us to the right tone of our practice. And for me, that's always calming down. Even when I'm giving this talk, calm down. But for other people, it's more, oh, put a little more energy there. Try it. You won't fail, try it. So anyway, I think wise effort is very important. And along with wise effort, I have two other words, which is embodiment. So again, I think this is, if I may say, a more feminine approach, that our practice has to lodge in our bodies, and not just understanding in the head. It has to come down. We have to feel it in our body, in our heart, and in our behavior. And really, of the Buddhism that I know, Zen's pretty good at embodiment. You know, we have a tenzo, we have picking the weeds off the path. Our physical sitting is very strong. But I do think all of us practically could work on bringing our practice out of our head and more into how we are in each moment. And the next one is wise amount. So Judith Ragir, Byakuren wants to add a ninth-fold path, a ninth-fold thing. So forgive me my arrogance. And the ninth thing I would add is wise amount. And maybe that would go down here too. So what I notice in my life, in my real life, is what is the wise amount of food, of reading the newspaper, of play, of reading a novel, of meditation. What's the wise amount of meditation? How many sessions do I actually need to go on? So I feel like wise amount is a wonderful practice of consciously looking at, do I need more or less? Am I doing fine in terms of balance? Let's see, I'm skipping a lot of these. So let's go over to wise view, but I'm not going to skip that one because that's really important. So this is under wisdom. We're now, did I say that enough? We're now over here, and here are the two aspects of prajna. And again, here in my new energy for practice, I would like to uplift or uphold the more heart qualities as well as the traditional view of wisdom. So traditionally, we have the three seals: impermanence, that everything's changing; no centralized self, which I now mostly think is interdependence, that I am not a separate unit, but I'm completely inter-be with all the other conditions and objects and people in my life. And the third seal, I would like to talk about the third seal, because traditionally, I was taught that the third seal was dukkha, or karma, or suffering, or cause and effect was the third seal. And then about 10 years ago, both the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh changed the third seal to nirvana. It's like, what are they doing? I was totally shocked. So I spent several years contemplated, why did these two men, both of whom came from war, both of whom were exiled from their people, both of whom have incredible auras and are very important to Buddhist life on the planet, and they both changed to dukkha, to nirvana, for the three seals of life. That's very profound, very powerful to me. And I thought, oh, what they're trying to say is this pivot that I've been talking about, of pivoting our cause and effect, of having more choice, of planting the seeds of virtue. This pivot allows transformation, allows dukkha to be turned into nirvana. So now I kind of think of the three seals as the last one being the availability of transformation, that there is transformation in a human life, that you can find, I don't want to say peace, but you can find stability. Katagiri Roshi used to call it spiritual stability even in the worst conditions, like these men have experienced. So I consider these three seals the transcendent aspect of Buddhism, or ascending Buddhism. And descending Buddhism, this is where my feminist wishes are, is that we don't dismiss, or we hold equally, the two arms of the Buddha, which is wisdom and compassion. And compassion is what we need to face the samsara of our realm that we live in. We need to have the divine abodes, which are sometimes called the Brahma Viharas. We need to have these heart qualities in our life, in our behavior. We need to honor our stories, not dismiss our stories, but go through our stories with these equanimity and kindness and so forth. And I think that that will open up a whole different way of feeling liberation. I see that my time is starting to be closed, so I want to talk about wise intention. For me, is one of the main ways I practice. I really uphold it strongly, which is I need to be in alignment with my spiritual intentions. So that means they have to be very conscious. I have to think about them at least daily, but maybe many times a day. And they have to be clarified. Purification of my motive. What am I doing this for? What is behind my actions? Is love there? Like now I have a practice, and I hope I'm doing it right now, of standing in love, talking about the Dharma because I love the Dharma, even though I have criticism of the Dharma or the way it's been taught. But I love it. And from that place of love, I can offer my suggestions. So I can't underestimate the power of conscious intentions and staying in alignment with them as I go through my day, my week, my year. So I just want to, maybe this is in the wrong place. Yeah. I'd like to move down to ethics for my last, I'm going to, for the last 5 minutes, say. So I feel like our Buddhist teaching, our Zen teaching has fallen short, as I've said, in this base. I've just spent this last 4 years working on wise speech. I've been studying nonviolent communication up the wazoo because my speech was so awful. When I actually looked at my speech 4 years ago, I stopped talking. It was so full of judgment and me knowing better than other people. I just was shocked when I looked at my speech and how much I wanted to control other people. So I have really worked on it to my great advantage. I feel so much better now that I have and am continuing every single moment. Like I'm going to visit my children on Wednesday. They both live in Los Angeles now. And right speech with my kids are the most important thing. Otherwise, instead of making connections with them, I push them away. So right speech, wise speech is very important to me. Wise behavior, thankfully in Buddhism, we have the precepts. So we have a lot of stimulation. We could take one precept for a year or 5 years. And if we really had the intention to explore, be curious, investigate that precept, I think it would give us a lot of choice and a lot of self-understanding and a lot of contentment, where we're not harming other people as much. Of course, we're always harm, but how can we reduce the harm that we do to other people? And the last one, this is another Ragir-ism. I would like to change wise livelihood to wise finances. I think in the 21st century, that makes more sense because many of us are not butchers. You know, that's what it was like. What do you do for a living? And that's very important, very, very important. But I feel like whenever I'm working with my money, instead of feeling like, oh, that's stupid or sinful or not spiritual, money is not spiritual, I really want to change that, because money is the exchange in interdependence. It's part of our exchange system. And to use it wisely is very integral to the contentment of our minds. And I remember Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that if you are not somewhat secure, I'm just saying if you're not in survival mode, of course, if you're in survival mode, then your practice is quite different. But if you're not in survival mode and your finances are stable, you have much more room to work on your spiritual intentions. So wise finances are extremely important, and I don't think we talk about them. I remember in the 90s, do any of you remember Sherry Huber? She was a Zen teacher. I don't know where she is now. Maybe I should look her up. But in the 90s, she came out with a Zen book, and half the Zen book was about sex, questions about your sexuality, and half the book was questions about your money. And in her Zen community, they spent a year on sexuality and they spent a year on finances. And I thought that was so impressive. And I tried to do that a little bit at Clouds. And we had a class on sexuality and no one signed up. So that's the state we're in. Anyway, I'd like to see those. I'd like to see ethics honored and brought up, and to remember that in Asian communities, your practice starts with ethics. And then you go to meditation and prajna. So it's a kind of different orientation than convert Buddhism has. And I'll just show you, this book is on the market and I wrote the introduction, and it's all, well, it's 8 years ago or whatever that was, this chart, what I thought 8 years ago. I've now refined it quite a bit, and then the last thing I'll show you is my book that's coming out in July. So starting after July, I'll be giving talks on the book, and I will be giving a talk at Hokyoji on the book. All right. Now we can move to comments, questions, or responses.
I'm going to go.
So I look around and there's 5 or 6 of you who were at Clouds and Water. So this was probably not new. This is kind of a summation of what I taught at Clouds and Water. I saw your hand up, Tim.
Yes, thank you for this talk. It was really, really good. I enjoyed it very much. And I really like your introduction of finances into the equation, because the whole idea with the precepts is when our life is chaotic, it's harder to practice. It's harder to invest in the spiritual stuff. So we can, of course, if we're homeless or whatever, and and we lie all the time and we ruin all relationships, we can still practice. But things are easier if our life is less chaotic. And one thing that certainly makes a life chaotic is paycheck to paycheck, or a gambling problem or whatever. So I'd really like you adding that into the mix. That's all I have to say.
Kikan, hi.
Hi, Byakuren. Nice to see you. Thank you for your talk today. It's been a while. So going back way earlier in your talk, I was interested, you mentioned that Lojong and Tonglen are emotional practices in a way. I was wondering, because I'm very interested in working with emotion within Buddhism. I'm wondering if you could say more about why and how that is the case, that they're emotional practices.
That is a delightful question for me, and very, very important. There was a point when I was teaching, early in my teaching, when I felt there was a black hole at my heart that was not addressed by Zen. Forgive me for saying that. But that's what my experience was, that I got a lot of teaching, wonderful teaching, but it was not emotional. And I was very emotional and had a very disturbed, actually, emotional body because of the traumas I had as a child and young woman. So I started to look around to other Buddhist sects and see, well, what do they do for this part of your spiritual practice? Not just transcendent practice, or not just learning how to cut a carrot different than rip a piece of lettuce, which Zen does beautifully, but right in the middle there. And I think it might be Japanese, because the Japanese handle their emotions completely different culturally. So it might just be a cultural thing. I started to look around, and the Vipassana community emphasized mindfulness of emotions, which is the second foundation of mindfulness. So I started to say, oh, so it's okay if I try to name what I'm feeling. That's mindfulness of my emotions, or try to feel what I'm feeling. And then I tuned into Pema Chodron, who's fabulous at this. And in the 90s, I had a study group where we studied Pema Chodron on Lojong and Tonglen. And that was the Tibetans' effort to help you calm down or completely realize the beauty of emotions, that we're human beings, and in this realm, we're lucky to have emotions. But how do you practice with them? Both as feeling them and also as observing them or holding them. Like, I felt like Katagiri Roshi used to say, you have to just hold them. You can't get rid of them, but you have to experience them. You have to be available. Like, I have a quote on my wall: all emotions want is to be felt. And when they're thoroughly felt, they will release themselves. So, wow, that was beautiful. And then I found Tonglen, and boy, that's been the most helpful. It's also the easiest to put on Zazen, because Zazen is often focused on the breath, and Tonglen rides on the breath. So the inhale is feeling the emotion and the exhale is sending out love. And when I first started Tonglen, I couldn't do it at all. The inhale was a judgment, and I couldn't contact compassion. So it took me quite a while to be able to do what Tonglen was suggesting. And the other thing that was really important for me about Tonglen, I've taught this at Cloud, so many of you know this, is the instruction that you feel your emotion. Let me just say, nervousness about public speaking. You feel the emotion, that's yours, but then you open up your mind and you realize that even right now, there are hundreds of Zen teachers giving Sunday talks, or people public speaking, ministers. So I'm sharing this nervousness with humanity. This is part of being a human. And boy, opening the Tonglen has totally changed my relationship with my feelings. How did that do, Kikan?
Oh, that's great and fascinating. Thank you. I'm gonna, I took a lot of notes there and I'm gonna process that. I wonder if the quote you mentioned, all emotions want is to be felt, and when they're thoroughly felt, they release themselves. Do you know who that comes from?
No, you know what? I get these fabulous quotes. I write them on a postcard and I put them on my wall. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, I have no idea where I got them. And that was really terrible when I was writing the book, because, you got to ask for all these permissions. And I had no idea. So I'm sorry, I don't know where that quote comes.
That's all right. Anyway, thank you.
I think this is one of the main developments that Zen can do in the 21st century, is learning how to practice with relationships.
Can you say a little bit more about that? What you mean by practicing with relationships? Because I don't know if we've discussed that in this time.
So I felt I learned so much from Zen. I could write a love letter to Zen, but I did not learn about how to have my relationships. I had to learn that through psychotherapy, through 12-step, through taking classes on communication and relationship. So I think that's a weakness in Zen. And I think it can be changed if we're willing to not be so classical and try to find ways of bringing relationship. For example, and since you were at Clouds, I brought in circles, were brought in, talking circles, and like during Sesshin at the end, having a talking circle. That's relational, because you got to know what the other people sitting were dealing with. But in a classic Zen, just the teacher knows what everybody's dealing with. And I think that's a fault. I think that landing too much on the side of transcendence and not enough on the side of how do we do this in our daily life. And relationships, like how to be with my children. Do you know what my children said to me? That going to Sesshin so much, they felt abandoned. And that when I was having a fight with my son in the car and I knew I wasn't getting anywhere, I would go inside and do Tonglen. And it would calm me down, and I was praying for him. And we weren't fighting. So I thought that was good. And my adult son now tells me that he felt like I didn't care about him. So sometimes what we think we're doing has the opposite effect. And I would like that just to be more looked at, experimented with, talked about in a spiritual life. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I can really relate. Like years ago, like probably even the last time I talked to you extensively, I was in the mode of thinking that, Zen could answer all of my questions about how to function in life. And I was in that mode of thinking for a long time. And recently I realized, oh, there's some problems with that. Zen does not actually cover anything. So particularly in the area of emotions and I guess you could say relations, I've been looking at a lot of sources outside of Zen now for like additional information and like, thinking about, well, okay, how can I integrate this and bring it back? So I really appreciate your thoughts on that subject.
Well, that's what I've done, is keeping my love for Zen and what it's taught me. And it's extremely profound. I really haven't found anything more profound except in other Buddhisms. But on the other hand, having a lot of modalities that help me learn more about humanness, relationship, and how to handle my psychological difficulties. So let's go to Diana. You've had your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate you being here for the teaching, and I did certainly get a lot out of it. I belong to a small local recovery sangha where we're helping each other with a Buddhist approach to recovery from addictive behaviors. So I just wondered if you had anything you could add or relate to this teaching for people who are struggling with severe addiction problems.
So I'm smiling because if you go to my website, there are more than 100 talks about a 12-step in Buddhism and how to interpret the steps through a Buddhist lens. Now, I did that a long time ago. It started in 2004. So they might be a little bit old because the recovery community has really bloomed since then. So again, I think what we're talking about with Kikan applies in this case too. They are mutually important. I don't know, is your a 12-step group or it's more that Buddhist recovery group? Yeah.
Yes, Buddhist.
Those groups need them to talk about addiction, to understand trauma, to work very specifically on those habit patterns. And you also need Zen or Buddhist transcendent qualities, and they mutually help each other. And I, for one, could not have gotten where I am if I didn't have several modalities. So I'm 44 years sober, and I did 12-step work. In 77, when I went in, there was no Buddhist recovery. You did it through 12-step. And there wasn't even recovery treatment centers, at that time. So I did it through that. I did it through psychotherapy. I did it through Buddhism, definitely. And, with psychotherapy, it helps a lot, but there is, at a certain point, you have to have spiritual to open it up, to give you forgiveness, for example. That's a spiritual quality. So several modalities mutually working together is my emphasis. And maybe the 21st century Buddhism will begin to incorporate other modalities that maybe you won't have to do that in the 22nd century, but certainly now I feel we need a lot of different things, especially Americans. We're so alienated. We're so traumatized. We're so lack a sense of goodness within ourselves. So a lot of work and time and attention for healing needs to happen. And Buddhism, Zen, doesn't talk exactly about healing. I don't think so. So anyway, it's 10:36.
Thank you so much.
Kyoko,
Thank
do we
you.
need to stop or can we take Alan's hand?
Go ahead, Alan.
Alan, you're muted.
Good morning. I was saying it's just wonderful to hear your teaching voice again, Byakuren. One question is coming up for me. So in Zen, one of the things that I learned that was very helpful was about kind of, I guess I could say, disconnecting from my stories, or feeling like understanding that the stories aren't me, that I have choices that go beyond my stories. And I heard you say something today about maybe it was like honoring our stories, or so could you say a little bit more about that? Because it sounds like that's a little bit of a pivot from what I was taught.
Thank you so much. That's exactly the point here, and the point of my reevaluation, and the point of the book that's coming out. So I am with you. That's what I was taught, and that's what I did. And even Pema Chodron, who I totally admire, but her instruction was drop the storyline and enter the energy of the storyline. You know, I'm getting an echo. Why is that? Are other people getting an echo? No, maybe. All right. Do you remember that instruction? Drop the storyline and enter the energy and just feel the energy. So that was my practice for years and years and years. And then when I got into this period of doubt, I thought, why? And doubt, and two people started calling me Roshi. Do I feel like a Roshi? You know? No. Really, that echo is really bothering me. I wonder if you should
It's
mute.
between it's Kyoku and Hokyoji visitors are causing an echo. So if Kyoku could shut her door or mute herself.
Yeah, okay. It's hard for me to talk. Okay. What was I saying? Oh, we were talking about the story. Oh, Roshi. And I realized I had a lot of anxiety, and still in my body. And I said, what is that? My personal traumas I've worked out, and I sit in silence for the most part when I'm sitting. I've been teaching Buddhism for all these years. Why do I still have anxiety? And I realized at that point, I realized it was intergenerational anxiety. It was the anxiety of being a Jew. And then I thought, well, how can I release that? That's not my personal anxiety, but that's definitely in my DNA. I just wrote down, you know, they actually say that intergenerational trauma affects your DNA. It changes the telomeres that are at the ends of the chromosome. And you're more likely to have PTSD, the generations that follow. So what I decided to do was to go into my story, not dismiss my story, to really investigate what does it mean to be a Jew in this world. And that's when I started, and you guys were around to witness it. I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau with Glassman and the Peacemaker Order. And then I went to Hiroshima. This is all in the book. I went to Hiroshima, Nagasaki with Chosen and the Jesus for Peace. I went into my story and I cried. And it was horrible. To be at Auschwitz was just horrible. And to be at Hiroshima, that also, one I was the victim and the other I was the perpetrator. It was so deeply informative. And it helped me. Okay, so those things happened. And then I wrote the book. I wrote about my stories. And when I finished the book, I felt quite free. I felt released. Not 100%. I'm satisfied with 80%, yay, 80% of freedom. That's good enough for me. This dweeb that I am, 80%. So I learned from writing the book that there's another way to do it. The other way to do it is to go right in to the story, right in to the pain, right into the emotions, right into the hatred, and investigate that. And guess what? You find it's empty eventually. You find that it's the past. You find that there's no substance. You find that I am a Jew, but I'm also a beautiful person. And when you're from an oppressed community, there's so much self-hatred. How could I release my internalized anti-Semitism? And the way I found to do it was to go into the story, not dismiss the story. So that is slightly different than how I was taught, Buddhist-wise. And it's slightly different, but also I think you can find it. I think you could, if you went into the suttas, I think you could find it, that you have to go into it in order for it to disperse. What do you think of that?
Well, it's speaking to me in part because I've been going through old family correspondence that I had saved from times when things were really difficult in my family. So there's been a tension between being back in those times in my mind and knowing that I have a life to live now, and I've really got to find a way to do both of those things, to understand, to be accepting of, in some way, of that suffering that was happening back then. That's not, as you say, it's never totally resolved, but I'm here now.
So this is what I'm talking about, ascendance and descendants. We do need to ascend our story, which Zen is really good at. Going into the seals and letting go of our story. But I also think that we need to descend. We need to really straightforwardly look at what's happening. There's another chapter in my book about racism. And I feel like if white-skinned people don't directly look at the history of what happened, feel the pain of that, really not just dismiss it and transcend it. If we're going to change our behavior, the pain of what happened has to be felt, because that pain is the energy that inspires you to change. So there's a lot of stories that I dismissed that kept there being anxiety in my body. And now I'm just practicing in a slightly different way. But I would like to say we need both transcendence and descendance. We need both for freedom and the ability to have choice in our life.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've exceeded our usual endpoint. We have a choice here. Do we have other people with burning questions? In which case, maybe what we should do is do some closing blessings and then hang in there. And people with questions can stay on if Byakuren is willing also to stay on, or to end here and now. I did put Byakuren's webpage address in the chat box. So
Could
what
I
do we
end
think?
it with my merit offering song? Yeah. Okay. So let's just take 3 breaths and center ourselves a little bit. May the merit of this penetrate into each and everything and all places, so that we and the world together may realize the Buddha way.
It's time to say goodbye. For this time.
I'm willing to sit on if other people would like to talk, but I
Okay.
also, you can only absorb so much, you know.
All right, let me just make a few closing announcements. The first of which is thank you so much, Byakuren, for engaging us and sharing so much of your practice and your life. I want to let people know that next week, our board chair at Hokyoji, Tim Mesa-Jack, will be giving the talk. We also have in April, starting the 15th, we have a work weekend and also a land care weekend that you can see on our website. There's also going to be a Qigong group that's going to be doing a retreat. And if you're interested in that, let us know. So with that, for all of you who need to get on and might need some help, I'll ring a bell that indicates that you're welcome to get off. And then we'll keep the line open so you can keep asking questions of Byakuren.
It looks like we might be done.
Anyone else want to speak?
Hi, Ken. I think we're done, Kyoku. Unless Diana, do you want you still have your hand raised? Do you want to say something?
Sorry, I should have taken my hand down. Thank you. Looking forward to your book.
Thank you. You can pre-order it.
I
That would
already
help
have.
me.
I have on Amazon.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about it, but actually, what I talked about today was a lot about what the book is about. So it made me a little less nervous that I am able to talk about it.
Good.
You know, Ken, you're muted. Can you unmute? I can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Sorry, didn't realize I was muted.
Here you are. Hi, honey. How you doing?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's good. Just want to say it's wonderful to feel the energy and feel embraced by your practice and both my life and so much of our Sangha and community.
Yeah. It was fun today.
Yeah, so
Talk.
that was good.
Mhm. And also
To-
because half of the people I knew, so that was nice too. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Kyoku, for all you do and for being my backup person today and for diddling around with the PowerPoint. But the PowerPoint makes it more strong. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yes. Thanks for the PowerPoint. I'm sure there's a lot of people that appreciate knowing the video will include it and it helps them write things down.
So will the video be on your website?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah,
We'll
because
share the
I'll link my website to your website so people can see it.
Okay.
Right. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Kyoku.
Likewise, I'm always glad to see you. I keep wanting to get to visit you, and that will happen sooner or later. All right, I'm going to go now.